So welcome back to Managerial Accounting. The purpose of this little brief mini lecture is to review the results of the answers on the first exam. Remember, each multiple choice question was worth 2, so you could have got a maximum of 64 points. So if you look at your cover page there, I took the number of right answers you got, multiplied by 2. That was your first score. And then I wrote down the number of points you scored on 33, 34, 35, and 36. And remember, the maximum you could have got on question 33, which was a short and easy one, was 6 points. The rest of them were 10. So here goes. Which of the following accounts will be found on the income statement? The only one that's found on the income statement is cost of goods sold. The rest of them are all inventory accounts, which will be on the balance sheet. As we go through these, remember the first 8 questions were drawn from Chapter 1. Which of the following would be a period cost for a cake factory? So period costs are costs that we incur that don't become part of the cost of a product. So if we're manufacturing cakes, clearly flour, baker's wages, and frosting, those are all costs that become part of the cost of the product. So the only one that's a period cost would be transportation. Number 3, which of the following would most likely be considered indirect material by a manufacturer? Remember, we trace directly to the product the large amounts of raw material, those raw materials that we can trace directly to the product, overhead, we have material, we have labor, and those other costs that are more difficult to trace to individual products we call indirect materials, or we call overhead. So glue would be an example of an indirect cost. Number 4. What is the period cost? The period cost are those costs that don't become part of the product, and material, labor, and overhead all become part of the product. So our period cost there is $175,000, which are the operating expenses. Number 5, the cost of direct material is a small portion of the production cost that is mostly classified as factory overhead. Direct material, direct labor would be part of direct labor. Selling and administrative miscellaneous costs, those would all be period costs, but indirect materials, small amounts of materials go to the product, that would become part of factory overhead. So the answer there is D. Number 6, which the following is associated with managerial accounting? A, C, and D are all closely affiliated with financial accounting. It is in managerial accounting that we use a lot of estimates, for instance, when we come up with an overhead rate. So the answer there is B. Number 7, this one requires calculations. So it's the occupancy rate. So the total room nights sold, 500. You had 500 guests, each staying 5 nights. So that's 500 times 5, and you had 10 guests spending 2 nights. So if you multiply that all out, you get 2,520 room nights, and your capacity is 2,800. So that's how you got 90%. Which of the following is an example of direct labor for a cell phone manufacturer? Well, the cost of assembly worker wages, that would all be part of direct labor. All right, so the first 8 were drawn from Chapter 1. The next couple are drawn from Chapter 2, the next 8. This is for job order costing. The control account for job order cost sheets, that is work in process. So we take the total of all the job order sheets at any point in time, that's equal to your work in process. And they stay there till they're transferred to finished goods. Period costs are not involved in the production process, so they don't become part of the cost of the product themselves. Those are all costs not incurred involved in the production process. All these other things are a part of the product costs, so it's only B that would be a period cost. Period costs are those costs which are not part of the cost of the product. You'll see this again in the first problem that I assigned, 33. Which of the following accounts would be missing in the accounting system for a service provider? Service provider do not have finished goods, so the answer is B. Document authorizing the issuance of materials, that would be by definition a materials requisition. Which of the following is characteristic of process costing? B, C, and D are all typical of job order costing. The only one that is process costing there would be A. Okay, journal entries. So we want materials purchased on account during the month was 190. Materials requisitioned and placed into production. The journal entry for the requisition would be when the goods are requisitioned, they're transferred from one inventory account into another account. So they go from raw materials, and anytime you want to reduce an asset, you credit it. So you got a credit to materials, and you got a debit to work in process. So it goes from one type of inventory to the next. Okay, 15. Which of the following types of inventory does a manufacturer report on the balance sheet? Manufacturer would report raw materials or direct materials, work in process, and finished goods. So the answer there is C. Okay, first calculation here, factory overhead rate. Factory overhead rate for this company is applied on the basis of direct labor hours. So what is the rate, the direct labor dollars rather? So you take the estimated overhead, which is 179, divided by the estimated labor dollars, which is 90, so it's 199% of labor. Okay, for all these computational ones, even before I read all the data given, let's jump to what they're asking for. Using the FIFO method, the number of units started and completed. So all they want is the number of units started and completed. So if you started 15,000 and you had 1,600 that were in ending inventory in terms of finished goods, then the number that must have been actually completed this period would have been the 13,400. Okay. 18. Which of the following is uncharacteristic of process costing? So A is characteristic of process, B is characteristic of process, D is characteristic of process. So the only one that is not characteristic would be C. That would be more applicable to job order costing. Number 19, the following units were assembled. Direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. So the number of equivalent units with respect to direct materials are, if materials are added at the beginning of the process, then the equivalent units for materials, remember equivalent units as work done this period, would be 48,000. 21, in process costing, the amount of work in process is valued by, in process costing, allocated department costs between completed and partially completed units. That's how we do it in process costing. Those other ones there, A, C, and D, are all job order costing. Okay, here comes our first big calculation here. Let's again jump to what they're asking for. The cost of units started and completed. So we've got to figure out the number of units started and completed. Okay, started and completed, and then we have to figure out the unit cost for started and completed for both materials and conversion costs. So the cost of units started and completed during the period. So let's get the materials equivalent units first. So started and the material equivalent units, let's get the equivalent units. And again, equivalent units represents work during your period. So they told us since the materials are added at the beginning of the process, the materials were 10,400 units. So that's the amount of materials put into production. Now, what you could have done is you could have taken 10,400 put in production, subtracted out the number in hand at the end of the period, but then you would have just had to add it back. So the number of units that were actually put into production is 10,400. Conversion units is more complicated here. So for conversion units, you have to take a look at the beginning inventory. So you had 3,000 units, 3,600 units, 25% complete at the beginning of the period. So 3,000, and they were 25% completed at the beginning of the period. So that means you got 7,000. So that actually, I put 3,000, that should be 3,600 times 75%. So those would be the work that would be done to those, plus the 7,400 that were started and completed, okay, during the period. Plus, now you got the ending inventory of 3,000 units, which were 20% complete. So you end up with 10,700 units for conversion units. So it's a little mistake there. That shouldn't have been 3,600. That should have been 3,600, not 3,000. Okay. Okay. So you get 10,400 material equivalent units, and conversion units are 10,700. So the materials are given at $8 a unit. So now you have to get conversion cost per unit. So when you look at conversion cost, it's the 63 plus the 25, 63 plus the 25, divided by the 10,700, and that gives you the 8.2243. They said carry it to 4 decimal points. So the cost of goods started and completed, 7,400 times 8, and 7,400 times 8.2243. So that equals 120,060, and there you are. So the answer there is B. Okay, so when you look this over, remember I made an error here. That should have been 3,600 times 75%. Okay, next one. The number of conversion units and production finished goods inventory. Okay, the number of conversion equivalent units in the June 30th finishing department inventory, assuming that they use first in, first out method. So you had 7,000 units, and they were 60% complete. So with regard to conversion units, 7,000 times 0.6 gives me 4,200. Okay, very similar to what we had before. In fact, we got the same problem that we had back in 21. And they ask us to do something different here. They say, the cost of the 3,600 units of beginning inventory, which were completed during the period. So the inventory that was completed, what was the total cost of the inventory at the beginning of the period that was completed? So that would be the $40,000 worth of material, plus the percentage of the work that was done this period. So they were set 25% complete at the beginning of the period. So they must have had 75% of the work must have been done this period. So 40,000, which was the original cost that we had work in process, plus of the 3,600 units, we had to complete 75% of the work. Okay, and then times 88,000. So what did I get the 88,000? That was the conversion cost that we had. Yeah, that was the 63 plus the 25 we had in the previous problem. You can see it right here. So 40,000 plus 3,600 times 0.75 times 88,000 divided by 10,700. So that's 40,000 plus 2,700 units, which was the equivalent units there for the beginning inventory work done this period. And your conversion cost, this is your cost per unit. So that gives you $62,206. 24, what do they want to say? What is the following best describes the changes in the conversion cost? So the conversion cost that we had in August, we had 2,450, which was 70% complete. So 2,450, 70% of 5,000 is 3,500. So that means our average August conversion cost is 0.7. In July, it was 0.75, so it went down by 0.05 unit. 25, Boston factory had budgeted factory overhead of 13,500,000. Direct labor hours for the year are 10 million, and the actual factory overhead for the month are 35,000. The overhead allocated for May is. So what you need to do is you need to take the overhead rate, which is the 13,500,000, divided by 10 million, which is $1.35 an hour, multiplied by the number of direct labor hours that we have. So it's 472,500. And with all these things, I get my calculation first, and then I go look and see if that's one of the right answers. Activity-based costing can be beneficial for allocating selling and administrative. Which of the following would be best for a help desk? Of all the ones given there, probably the best method of allocating the cost of the help desk would be the number of calls. Okay, and this one here, plant-wide overhead rate for the current year. So you take the overhead for the year, which is given at 700,000. They allocate on the basis of machine hours, which were 100,000. 700,000 divided by 100,000 gives you $7 an hour. 28, which of the following is reason for banks to use activity-based costing? So it's both for the amount to charge and the profitability of their services. So some of these you got to take the best right answer, and the best right answer there is D. 29, which of the following managerial decisions relies on accurate product costing? They all rely on accurate product costing. So the best answer is D. Okay. Let's see. Let's see what they want us to do. Using the direct factory overhead rate with allocation, a base of direct labor hours, the factory overhead that will allocate to the small table production if actual labor hours for the period for the small table would be 285,000. Okay, so what you have to do is you've got to come up with your override plant-wide overhead rate. So you got $640,000, estimated 400,000 estimated direct labor hours, which gives you 1.6 per hour, and you multiply that by the actual direct labor hours for the period, which were 285. That gives you 456. And 31, if the selling administrative expenses are allocated to different products for decision making, they should be reported in the financial statement as a period cost. They're not part of the cost of the goods manufactured, factory overhead, or part of the cost of goods sold. And this last one here, another computation here. What do they want us to do? The overhead for both production departments allocated to product A, if Blue Ridge Marketing uses the multiple production department factory overhead rate is. Right? So what you need to do is you need to come up with two overhead rates. The overhead rate in painting, so that's 248,000 divided by 10,000 labor hours, so that's 24.8 an hour. And the finishing is 72,000 divided by 10,000 hours, so that's $7.2 an hour. And then as far as the actual cost of the product, so you've got the painting department, you get the finishing department. So the painting department, this is for product A, it's got 16 hours of painting. So 16 times 24.8, and it's got 4 hours of finishing. 4 times 7.2 gives you 2880. Add those together, you get 425.60, and that the answer there is B. All right, and now for the problems here. The first one was worth 6 points. So what you see here is what was product cost and what was period cost. So some of you got confused by sales. Sales is neither a product cost or a period cost. If you included sales, you screwed up all your numbers there. That's sales revenue, which is the first item on the income statement. Period cost would be those costs, those expenses that are not allocated to the product. And these are all the different costs that are allocated to the product. So you can see here that the two period costs were sales and office salaries. All the other stuff there were product costs. So that's how you get 35,000 and then get to 24.5. So to get full credit, you had to show your work and you had to get the correct allocation. Next one, I think just about everybody got right. So you just had to figure out the cost of the job. So the cost of the job was eight tons at $600 a ton, and direct labor was 80 hours at 21, and the factory overhead was $9 per hour. So you multiplied 80 times 9, and that gave you the 7,200. And this next one here, we try to make it simple for you. We actually gave you the number of the equivalent units. So there's your equivalent units number. And they also gave us the equivalent cost of materials was 47 cents of materials, and conversion costs are 0.15. So what they want us to do is they want us to determine the cost of completed and transferred out production and the ending work in process inventory. So your total cost would be the beginning inventory of $3,500. Then the materials, you added no direct materials, but you had equivalent units of 3,000 at 15 cents. That's 450. And then started and completed during the period, that's 52,000 times 4.47, 52,000 times 0.15. So you get the total transferred out of bottling completed is $36,190. And then your ending inventory, you've got 3,500 units, equivalent units, and it's 0.47 cents. And for conversion, they gave you the number of equivalent units for conversion of 2,100. So it's 2,100 times 15 cents. So there's how you get your allocation. 36,190 completed and transferred out, and your ending inventory is 1,960. And then the last one here, determine the amount of factory overhead allocated per unit for each product, round dollars to the nearest cent. All right. So the overhead rate that we come up with, we got to get the total number of direct labor hours. So we had 60,000 units of handbags. They take 2 hours to make. So there's 120,000 direct labor hours. Moccasins, we made 40,000 pairs. They take 3 hours to make. So there's 120. So my total direct labor hours is 240,000. My overhead rate is, my total estimated overhead is 360. I divide that by 240. So I get direct labor hours of 150. And then they tell us that every handbag takes 2 hours to make. So 150 times 2 gives me $3. And every moccasin takes 3. And 3 times 150 gives me 450. Okay, so I went through that kind of quickly, but you have, go back and look at what you've done. I'd say overall, people did it very well on the take-home part of the exam. And again, that reflects the fact that 1, it was a take-home. 2, what we gave there was very similar to the exercises we went over in class, and was also very similar to the homework. Another good recommendation for doing the homework. Most of you did not do as well on the multiple choice as you did on the problems. So what I would suggest is you augment whatever you did this time in terms of preparing for the multiple choice. You spend additional time preparing for the next exam. I would recommend doing a lot of drill on the multiple choice. Do the multiple choice question at the back of each chapter, and go to that diagnostic tool for each chapter and spend a lot of time. Go through it 2 or 3 times. Go through the multiple choice practice and diagnostic that they give you for each chapter as well. Okay, so I hope you found this useful, and we will see you tonight. Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.